The interruption. The late afternoon shadows stretched long across the suburban street when Dang Yong killed the engine, his dark sedan idling at the curb like a predator waiting in the tall grass. He'd come to this neighborhood to finalize arrangements, the kind that required silence, precision, and the absolute certainty that no one would remember his face. His reflection in the rearview mirror was all sharp angles and cold calculation, the frames of his glasses catching the dying light, tattoos disappearing beneath the collar of his black shirt like secrets written on skin. He was reaching for his phone to confirm the next move when a sound shattered the carefully constructed silence. A child's cry, raw and desperate, cutting through the quiet like a blade. Yong's hand froze. His eyes snapped up just in time to see her. A little girl, no more than 6 years old, running toward his car with a speed born of pure panic. Her pink dress billowed behind her, one shoe missing, tears carving paths down her dark cheeks. She didn't slow down, didn't hesitate, didn't seem to register the danger radiating from him like heat from asphalt on a summer day. She slammed her small hands against his window, her voice breaking through sobs as she begged, "Please follow me home." Every survival instinct Yong had honed over decades in the underworld screamed the same warning. Trap. Setup. Ambush. His hand moved instinctively toward the weapon concealed at his hip, his jaw tightening as he scanned the street for threats. Rival crews, undercover cops, anyone who might use a child as bait. But then he made the mistake of looking at her face. In her eyes, there was no calculation, no deception. Only terror so pure and desperate it cut through every wall he'd built around himself. This wasn't a setup. This was something far more dangerous, a genuine cry for help. And despite every rule he'd lived by, every lesson that had kept him alive in a world where compassion was a fatal weakness, Dang Yong found himself unable to look away. Something in those eyes, that mixture of helplessness, hope, and absolute trust that he was the only person in the world who could save her, made him realize this wasn't just an interruption to his evening. This was a moment that would change everything. Before we go any further, if stories like this move you the way they move me, make sure you subscribe. It helps these stories continue, and it tells me you want more. Yong's fingers tightened on the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. Leave. Drive away. Disappear into the network of streets and safe houses that had kept him untouchable for 15 years. The logical part of his brain, the part that had survived 3 gang wars and a federal investigation, was already mapping escape routes, calculating response times, identifying sight lines where a sniper might be positioned. But the child wasn't moving. She stood there, one small fist still pressed against his window, her chest heaving with sobs that seemed too big for her tiny frame. Her other hand clutched something, a stuffed animal, maybe, or a doll, so tightly her knuckles matched his own. "Please," she whispered again, and the word cracked like glass. Yong's hand moved to the door handle before he could stop himself. Wrong move. Stupid move. Fatal move. In his world, hesitation got you killed. Sentiment got you buried. He'd built an empire on the principle that nothing mattered except power, that everyone was either an asset or a threat, that the moment you let your guard down was the moment someone put a bullet in your spine. The door opened with a click that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet street. He unfolded himself from the car slowly, deliberately, every movement controlled. At 6 feet tall with shoulders that filled doorways and ink that crawled up his neck like smoke, Dang Yong had learned long ago that his presence alone was a weapon. People crossed streets to avoid him. Hardened criminals dropped their eyes when he entered a room. Children, normal children, children with any sense of self-preservation, ran away from him, not toward him. But Kayla didn't run. She looked up at him with those wide, terrified eyes and reached for his hand. The touch hit him like voltage. Her palm was so small against his, her fingers barely wrapping around 2 of his own. She tugged with surprising strength for someone so fragile, pulling him away from the car, away from safety, away from everything that made sense. "My mommy," she gasped between sobs, already moving, dragging him forward. "She won't wake up. I tried so hard, but she won't wake up, and I don't know what to do, and you're the only person I saw, and please, please, please." Yong let himself be pulled. Every tactical training session, every hard-won lesson about survival, every rule he'd written in blood, all of it dissolved in the face of a 6-year-old's desperate grip. He scanned the street one more time, his free hand hovering near his concealed weapon, his body coiled and ready for violence. But there was no ambush, no trap. Just a child who'd chosen the most dangerous man on the block to be her hero, and the terrifying realization that he couldn't bring himself to prove her wrong. "If you're still here, thank you. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the rest of stories like this. Kayla led him deeper into the neighborhood, her small hand still locked around his fingers like a lifeline. With each step, the houses grew shabbier, the lawns more overgrown, the American dream curdling into something desperate and forgotten. Yong's trained eye cataloged every detail. The chain-link fences sagging like broken promises, the cars on blocks and driveways, the windows covered with cardboard instead of curtains. This wasn't the kind of neighborhood where his organization operated. Too poor. No profit margin. Nothing worth protecting or extorting. The people here had already been robbed by something far more systematic than any street gang could manage. They turned down an alley where weeds pushed through cracked asphalt like fingers clawing toward the light. A shopping cart lay overturned near a dumpster, its contents scattered and picked over by crows that watched their passage with black, indifferent eyes. Yong's hand never left the concealed weapon at his hip, but his certainty about danger was shifting, morphing into something worse than a physical threat. This was the kind of poverty that killed slowly, invisibly, without ever making the news. Kayla pulled him around a corner and stopped in front of a house that made Yong's jaw tighten. The structure leaned slightly to the left, as if the foundation had given up trying. Paint peeled from the siding in long, leprous strips, exposing wood so weathered it had turned gray. 2 windows on the ground floor were cracked, held together with duct tape that had yellowed with age. The front steps had rotted through in places, leaving gaps like missing teeth. A child's bicycle lay rusted in the yard beside a broken plastic slide, their bright colors faded to pastels by years of sun and neglect. Someone had tried. A pot of dead flowers sat on the porch railing, and a cheerful welcome mat lay at the door, its message barely visible beneath accumulated dirt. The door hung slightly ajar. Yong felt his predatory instincts shift into something else, something uncomfortable that sat in his chest like swallowed glass. This wasn't a setup. No one would stage an ambush in a place this broken, this forgotten. The door was open because the lock had probably stopped working months ago. The windows were cracked because there was no money to replace them. The house leaned because no one cared enough to notice it was falling. "In here," Kayla whispered and pushed through the door. "Mommy's in here." Yong followed her across the threshold, and the smell hit him immediately. Stale air, unwashed laundry, something sour and sweet that spoke of illness and desperation. Inside, the house was worse than outside. Furniture that belonged in a dumpster. Walls with water stains blooming like dark flowers. A kitchen visible through a doorway where dishes were piled in a sink, and an empty refrigerator hummed apologetically in the corner. This wasn't danger. This was tragedy, slow motion, and inevitable, and Yong had just walked straight into its center. Kayla pulled him through the narrow hallway, past a bathroom where mold climbed the walls like ivy, past a bedroom with a mattress on the floor and children's drawings taped to cracked plaster. She stopped at the last door, her hand trembling as she pushed it open. The woman lay on a couch that had seen better decades, her body curled into a fetal position beneath a thin blanket that had been washed so many times it was nearly transparent. Even from the doorway, Yong could see she was in bad shape, her breathing shallow and ragged, her face the color of ash, her lips cracked and bleeding. A bucket sat on the floor beside her, its contents making Yong's stomach turn. "Mommy won't wake up," Kayla whispered, moving to the woman's side and touching her shoulder with heartbreaking gentleness. "I tried to give her water, but she just sleeps." Yong crossed the room in 3 strides and dropped to one knee beside the couch, his fingers automatically moving to the woman's neck to check her pulse. Weak. Thready. Her skin burned under his touch. Fever. High enough to be dangerous. Her eyes fluttered but didn't open, and when he pulled back the blanket, he saw bruises blooming across her ribs in shades of purple and yellow, some fresh, some weeks old. His jaw clenched hard enough to hurt. He'd seen injuries like this before. Hell, he'd caused injuries like this before. But seeing them on an unconscious woman in a house that was barely standing, with a 6-year-old child as her only caretaker. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over the numbers 911. The logical move. The legal move. The move that any decent human being would make. But Dang Yong wasn't decent, and he'd spent 15 years making sure the authorities never had reason to look at him twice. An ambulance meant paramedics. Paramedics meant police reports. Police reports meant questions. Questions meant attention. And attention was the last thing he could afford, especially with tonight's actual business still unfinished in the trunk of his car. He scrolled through his contacts instead, his thumb landing on a name that had saved his life twice and buried bodies 3 times. The phone rang once before a gravelly voice answered. "I need a doctor. Yong said quietly, his eyes never leaving Teresa's ashen face. Discreet. Mobile. Now. What happened? Dr. Chen's voice sharpened with professional curiosity. Cleanup or extraction? Neither. Yong glanced at Kayla, who was watching him with those impossibly trusting eyes. Medical emergency. Civilian. Critical condition. I'll send you the address. A pause. You're calling me for a civilian? You asking questions or getting in your car? On my way. 20 minutes. Yong ended the call and looked down at the woman who was barely breathing, at the child who'd somehow decided that a monster was her best hope for salvation. He'd made his choice. Now he just had to live with whatever came next. Dr. Chin arrived in 18 minutes with 2 members of Yong's crew, moving through the door with the practiced efficiency of men who'd worked in worse conditions. They carried medical bags that cost more than everything in this house combined, their faces professionally blank as they took in the scene. No questions. No judgments. Just immediate action. Yong moved to the corner of the room, positioning himself where he could watch both the door and the team working on Teresa. Old habits. Chun barked orders in medical terminology Yong didn't understand, pulling out 4 bags and equipment that transformed the decrepit living room into a makeshift emergency ward. Kayla stood frozen near the couch, her eyes wide with fear as strange men surrounded her mother with needles and tubes and urgent voices. She looked lost, a small island in a sea of controlled chaos, her hands twisting the fabric of her pink dress until Yong thought it might tear. He should stay in the corner. Keep his distance. Maintain the cold professional detachment that had kept him alive this long. But then Kayla's eyes found his, and he watched her make a decision that defied all logic. She crossed the room and pressed herself against his leg, her small arms wrapping around his tattooed forearm like he was something stable in a world that had just tilted sideways. Yong went rigid. No one touched him. Ever. Physical contact was either a prelude to violence or a weakness to be exploited. He'd trained himself out of human warmth the same way soldiers train themselves out of flinching at gunfire. But Kayla just held on tighter, her face buried against his arm, her tears soaking through his sleeve. Is Mommy going to die? She whispered. The question hit harder than it should have. No, Yong heard himself say, the word rough and unfamiliar. They're going to help her. Promise? He should tell her the truth, that he couldn't promise anything, that life was brutal and random and fair to no one. Instead, he found himself nodding, his free hand moving awkwardly to rest on her head. Promise. Kayla relaxed slightly, her grip loosening but never letting go. We don't got nobody else, she said quietly, her voice muffled against his arm. Just me and Mommy. She works real hard, but she's always tired, and sometimes she cries when she thinks I'm sleeping, and she says sorry a lot, but I don't know what she's sorry for. Each word was a small knife. Yong kept his eyes on Chen's team, watching them work, but his attention was trapped by the child clinging to him like he was capable of salvation. The other kids at school got daddies, Kayla continued, her voice small and matter-of-fact. I don't got one. Mommy says he went away before I was born. Do you got kids? No. Oh, a pause. You'd be a good daddy. You're strong and you came when I asked. Yong's throat tightened. If she only knew what those strong hands had done, how many lives he'd destroyed, how far from good he actually was. But she didn't know. She just held on. 20 minutes later, Chun peeled off his gloves and gestured for Yong to step into the hallway. Kayla had finally fallen asleep against his arm, exhausted by fear and tears, her small body warm and trusting. Yong carefully extracted himself and laid her on a chair, draping his jacket over her like a blanket before following the doctor into the dim corridor. Chin kept his voice low, clinical. She's stabilized for now. But this wasn't sudden, Yong. This is systemic collapse. Explain. Pneumonia, severe. Probably been developing for weeks, maybe months. Untreated infections. Malnutrition disguised as stress weight loss. Dehydration. Chin paused, his jaw tightening. And the bruising pattern suggests repeated blunt force trauma. Old injuries that never healed properly. Ribs that were cracked and never set. Someone's been using her as a punching bag. Yong's hands curled into fists. How long has she got? With proper treatment, she'll survive this crisis. But look around you. Chin gestured at the peeling walls, the water-stained ceiling, the pervasive smell of decay. This place is killing her as surely as any disease. The mold in the bathroom is probably what triggered the pneumonia. The stress of poverty is destroying her immune system. And whoever gave her those bruises, he shook his head. She needs antibiotics for fluids, real medical care. She needs safety. She needs money. So fix her and we're done. Are you? Chen's eyes were sharp, knowing. Because in 3 months she'll be back here. The mold will still be there. The poverty will still be there. Whatever situation she's running from will still be there. You can patch the leak today, but the dam is cracked all the way through. Yong stared at the floor, at the water-stained boards that sagged under his weight. Everything Chen said was true. He could stabilize Teresa tonight, walk away, return to his carefully constructed empire. In a month, Kayla would be back on these streets, looking for another stranger to save her mother. In 6 months, maybe there'd be no mother left to save. The kid asked me to promise, Yong said quietly. That's not your problem. I know, but it was. Somehow, in the space of 1 hour, a 6-year-old in a pink dress had made it his problem. She'd looked at a man who'd built his fortune on violence and seen someone worth trusting. She'd clung to tattooed arms that had broken bones and ended lives, and found safety there. Yong pulled out his phone again, scrolling through contacts that represented the full architecture of his criminal empire. Money launderers. Real estate contacts who specialized in untraceable transactions. Identity forgers. The same network that had protected him for 15 years, weaponized for something he'd never done before. Saving someone. I need a team, he said, his voice cold and decided. Apartment acquisition. Background cleaning. Medical trust setup. Anonymous. He looked up at Chen. How long to get her stable enough to move? Chen's eyebrows rose. You're serious? How long? 48 hours. Maybe less if we move her to the private clinic. Do it. And Chen. Yong's voice dropped to something dangerous. Find out who put those bruises on her. Discreetly. The doctor nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. This is going to cost you. Yong thought of Kayla sleeping under his jacket, her faith in him absolute and terrifying. I know. The calls started at midnight and continued until dawn. Yong worked from the front porch of the decaying house, his phone pressed to his ear, his voice low and commanding as he orchestrated an operation more complex than most of his legitimate criminal enterprises. First call went to Min Jun, his money launderer, who could make millions disappear into offshore accounts without leaving a trace. I need a trust fund. Anonymous. Beneficiary is a civilian single mother. Amount. He paused, calculating medical costs, living expenses, a buffer for emergencies. $500,000. Structured payouts monthly. Make it look like settlement money from a lawsuit. Corporate defendant, sealed records. Minjun didn't ask questions. He never did. 72 hours. 48. Done. Second call was to Park, his real estate contact who specialized in properties that never appeared on official records. I need an apartment. 2-bedroom, safe neighborhood, good schools. Clean building, no mold, no code violations. Lease needs to be paid 3 years in advance through a management company that won't ask questions. Budget. Whatever it takes. And Park. Run background checks on every neighbor within 100 yards. No registered offenders, no violent records. I want her in a fortress that looks like a home. Park whistled low. This for one of your guys? No questions. Right. Sorry, boss. 2 days. 1. The third call was harder. Jiwoo answered on the first ring, her voice sharp with suspicion. She handled identity fabrication, birth certificates, social security numbers, background histories that could withstand government scrutiny. I need a clean identity for a woman. Mid-30s. No criminal record, good credit history, employment records that support stable income. Medical history needs to be sanitized. Remove any red flags that might trigger CPS involvement. Starting from scratch or modifying existing? Modifying. She's got a kid 6 years old. School records need to transfer seamlessly to a new district. Vaccination records, birth certificate, everything legitimate. Jiwoo was silent for a moment. You're helping someone disappear. I'm helping someone survive. That's new for you. Yong's jaw tightened. Can you do it or not? I can do it. But boss, whoever you're protecting, this kind of deep cover costs. And I don't mean money. I know what it costs. The fourth call went to Chin again. I need long-term medical care arranged. Private physician, pediatrician for the kid, mental health services. Everything billed to the trust Minjun's setting up. No questions asked, no mandatory reporting. She's going to wonder where this is all coming from. Let her think it's a church charity. A nonprofit. Whatever story makes sense. She can't know it's connected to me. By the time the sun started bleeding light into the eastern sky, Yong had mobilized 8 different cells of his organization. The same infrastructure that had protected his empire from federal prosecution, that had laundered money and eliminated threats and maintained his grip on power. All of it now weaponized for something absurdly simple. giving a woman and her daughter a chance at a normal life. Inside the house, Kayla stirred awake, calling for her mother. Yong pocketed his phone and stepped back through the door. Into the wreckage he was systematically dismantling and rebuilding from the inside out. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent 15 years perfecting the art of destruction. Turned out construction used the same tools. Teresa woke up 3 days later in a room that smelled like antiseptic and money. The ceiling was cream-colored and smooth, free of water stains and cracks. Soft light filtered through curtains that actually matched the bedding. And 4 drip fed clear fluid into her arm, and monitors beeped steadily beside the bed, tracking vitals she didn't understand. For a long moment, she thought she was dead. Then Kayla's voice cut through the fog. "Mommy, you're awake." A nurse, young, professional, wearing scrubs that looked expensive, smiled and pressed a call button. "Welcome back, Ms. Martinez. You gave us quite a scare. Your daughter's been very brave." Teresa tried to speak, but her throat was sandpaper. The nurse brought water with a straw, and she drank gratefully before managing. Where am I?" "St. Catherine's Private Recovery Center. You were brought in with severe pneumonia and complications. You've been in our care for 72 hours. I can't afford. It's been taken care of." The nurse's smile never wavered. "A charitable foundation. They cover cases like yours. All you need to focus on is getting better." Across the city, Yong stood in the doorway of apartment 4B, watching his crew transform an empty space into something that might pass for a home. They moved with the same efficiency they brought to crime scenes, but instead of disposing of evidence, they were building a life. Minjun directed the furniture delivery. A couch that wasn't stained, a dining table with 4 matching chairs, beds with actual frames and new mattresses still wrapped in plastic. Park supervised the kitchen setup, stocking the refrigerator and pantry with enough food to last a month. Someone else assembled a small desk in the second bedroom and lined shelves with children's books, their spines uncracked and promising. "Boss, what about the walls?" One of his men gestured at the blank, cream-colored surfaces. "Pictures? Decorations?" Yong considered. Too much would be suspicious. Too little would feel institutional. One piece in the living room. Something with flowers. And get some of those removable wall stickers for the kids' room. Butterflies or something. The man nodded and made a note, like he was planning a hit instead of decorating a 6-year-old's bedroom. Ji-woo appeared in the doorway, holding a folder thick with documents. New identities are ready. Teresa Martinez becomes Teresa Matthews, same first name, easier transition. Employment history shows her as a remote medical billing specialist, which explains flexible hours and recent gap due to illness. I've set up email accounts, social media profiles, everything backdated 6 months. The kid? Kayla Matthews. Birth certificate, vaccination records, school transcripts. She's enrolled at Meadowbrook Elementary, starts next Monday. I've already contacted the school counselor, mentioned she's transitioning from a difficult situation. They'll keep an eye on her. Yong walked through the apartment, his shoes silent on carpet that didn't reek of mold and decades of poverty. 2 bedrooms. A bathroom with a shower that worked and tiles that weren't cracked. A kitchen with appliances from this century. Windows that locked. A door with a deadbolt that actually functioned. It was modest by any standard. But compared to where they'd been, it was a palace. "She's going to ask questions," Ji-woo said quietly. "About how this happened. About who's behind it." Yong stared out the window at a neighborhood where children played on maintained sidewalks and families walked dogs without looking over their shoulders. "Let her ask. She'll never get answers." "Good." Ji-woo paused. "For what it's worth, boss. This is the best thing you've ever done." Yong didn't respond. He just pulled out his phone to check on Teresa's recovery timeline, already calculating the logistics of the transfer neither woman would ever understand. The discharge happened on a Thursday morning under a sky that promised rain but never delivered. Teresa sat in a wheelchair at the clinic's private exit, Kayla pressed against her side, both of them wearing new clothes that had appeared in their room with tags still attached. A nurse handed Teresa a folder containing discharge instructions, prescription information, and a business card for a physician who would handle her follow-up care. All prepaid, all anonymous. "The van is waiting," the nurse said, gesturing to a plain white vehicle that looked unremarkable except for the way its engine purred like a predator. Teresa's hands shook as she held the folder. "I don't understand. Who's paying for all this? Who arranged?" "St. Catherine's partners with several charitable organizations." The nurse's smile was practiced, kind, revealing nothing. "Sometimes we're blessed to be able to help families in crisis." All you need to do is accept the gift and focus on healing. The van driver, one of Yong's men wearing civilian clothes and an expression of studied boredom, loaded their few belongings and helped Teresa into the passenger seat. Kayla climbed into the back, her eyes wide as she took in the clean interior, the working seatbelts, the absence of rust and decay. They drove through the city as Teresa watched the neighborhoods change through the window, her confusion mounting with each turn away from the ruined house she'd called home. When they finally stopped in front of a well-maintained building with a small playground visible nearby, she turned to the driver with panic rising in her throat. "This isn't, where are we?" "Your new residence," he said simply, handing her a key ring. "Apartment 4B. Fully furnished. Lease paid for 3 years. All the details are in the welcome packet on the kitchen counter." Teresa stumbled out of the van on legs that still weren't steady, Kayla's hand gripping hers tightly. The driver carried their bags to the building entrance, pressed the key into Teresa's palm, and drove away before she could form another question. The apartment was exactly as Yong had left it. Teresa stood in the doorway for a full minute, her hand covering her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Kayla ran through the rooms, exclaiming over the books, the butterfly stickers someone had carefully applied to her bedroom wall, the refrigerator full of food she recognized from commercials, but had never been able to afford. "Mommy, look. A real bed. And it's so soft." Teresa sank onto the couch, the clean, intact couch, and opened the welcome packet with trembling fingers. Inside was a letter on letterhead from Hope Harbor Charitable Trust, explaining that she'd been selected as a recipient of their family support program. Medical expenses covered. Living expenses supplemented through monthly stipends. Employment assistance available. All provided anonymously by donors who wished only to help families rebuild their lives. It was impossible. It was miraculous. It was a lie so carefully constructed that Teresa had no choice but to believe it. A block away, Yong sat in his car with the engine idling, watching the building through tinted windows. He saw Teresa appear at the window, saw her press her hand against the glass like she was trying to confirm the apartment was real. Saw Kayla bounce beside her, pointing at something outside with pure joy on her face. He'd never see them again. That was the deal he'd made with himself. One intervention. One act of uncharacteristic mercy. Then back to the business of being who he really was. But he sat there for another 10 minutes anyway, watching the light in their window, before finally putting the car in drive and disappearing into the city that had made him a monster. One more chapter to go. Before we finish, subscribe so you're here when the next story drops. 6 weeks passed like a fever dream that Yong couldn't shake. He returned to his empire, to the careful choreography of violence and profit that had defined him for so long. But something had shifted, like a bone set wrong that ached every time the weather changed. He told himself he didn't think about them. He told himself the surveillance reports his crew still filed were just due diligence, protecting his investment, making sure no one connected him to the miracle he'd engineered. He told himself the route he drove past their neighborhood every Tuesday wasn't a pattern, just coincidence. He was a liar, even to himself. It was a Thursday evening, the sky bleeding orange and gold, when he found himself on their street again. The excuse this time was a meeting 3 blocks over. Legitimate business that had nothing to do with a 6-year-old girl or her mother. But when the meeting ended early, Yong's hands turned the wheel toward the apartment building like they had a will of their own. The neighborhood looked different in the fading light. Children played on the sidewalk, their laughter carrying through his half-open window. A couple walked past holding grocery bags, easy and unhurried. Normal. Safe. The kind of place where people planted roots instead of running. He drove slowly, telling himself this was the last time, that he needed to sever this connection before it became a weakness someone could exploit. And that's when he saw her. Kayla stood outside the building entrance, older somehow despite only 6 weeks passing. She wore a purple jacket over her school uniform, a backpack with cartoon characters slung over one shoulder. She was laughing with another little girl, their heads bent together over something. A phone, maybe, or a toy. Then she looked up, and her eyes found his car. Found him. For 3 heartbeats, the world narrowed to just the 2 of them. Yong's foot hovered over the gas pedal. He could accelerate, disappear into traffic, let this moment dissolve like it had never happened. He should. Every instinct screamed at him to leave. But Kayla's face transformed. Surprise melting into recognition, melting into something that looked dangerously like joy. Her hand shot up, waving with such enthusiasm her whole body moved with it. The backpack slipped off her shoulder, forgotten. She took 2 steps toward the street, stopped at the curb like she'd been taught, and called out, Mister. The other little girl tugged at her sleeve, confused, asking something Young couldn't hear. Kayla ignored her, her eyes locked on him, her smile so wide and trusting it felt like a knife between his ribs. He shouldn't acknowledge her. Shouldn't roll down the window. Shouldn't do anything that confirmed the connection between a criminal and the family he'd saved. But his hand moved anyway, lowering the glass, and Kayla's smile somehow got brighter. "You came back," she called, bouncing on her toes. "I knew you would. Mommy says I imagined you, but I didn't. I knew you were real." Before Young could respond, the building entrance opened and Teresa emerged, carrying a bag of groceries. She was calling Kayla's name, her voice carrying the particular note of parental concern that meant get over here right now. But then she saw where her daughter was looking, saw the expensive black car idling at the curb, and her face changed. Recognition flickered across her features, not of him specifically, but of the type of man he was. The tattoos creeping up his neck, the cold calculation in his eyes. The way he held himself like violence was always an option. Teresa had lived hard enough, long enough, to know danger when she saw it. She crossed the distance in 4 strides and pulled Kayla back from the curb, her hand firm on her daughter's shoulder. "Inside. Now." "But Mommy." "Now, Kayla." Their eyes met across the space of asphalt and fading light. Teresa stared at him with a mixture of confusion, fear, and something else. A question she didn't want to ask because she was afraid of the answer. "Who are you? Why are you here? What do you want with my daughter?" Young stared back, his face impassive, giving her nothing. Let her wonder. Let her worry. Better she thought him a threat than learn the truth. Teresa pulled Kayla toward the building, but the girl twisted in her mother's grip, still waving, still smiling. "Bye. Come back soon." Then they were gone, swallowed by the building's entrance, and Young was alone in his car with the taste of something bitter on his tongue. He'd made a mistake, letting Kayla see him. Now Teresa would be on guard, watching for threats, maybe even thinking about moving again. He should leave them alone. Walk away. Let the miracle he'd created stand on its own. His phone buzzed, shattering the moment. Chen's name appeared on the screen with a text message. Found him. The ex confirmed domestic violence, restraining order violated twice. And boss, he's been asking around. Looking for her. Yong's hands tightened on the steering wheel until the leather creaked. He read the message again, each word landing like a punch. Looking for her. A second text appeared. He knows about the apartment. Not sure how yet, but he's getting close. The world went very quiet. Yong stared at the building where Teresa and Kayla had just disappeared, at the windows glowing warm in the gathering dark. He'd given them safety, security, a chance at normal. And now the violence they'd been running from was circling back, drawn by whatever scent predators followed when they hunted. A third text. What do you want me to do? Yong sat there for a long moment, his eyes on the building, his mind calculating distances and timelines and the cold mathematics of violence. He'd saved them once by deploying resources, by using money and connections to build a wall between them and the world. But walls only worked when the threat stayed on the other side. He typed back, "Send me everything. Address. Schedule. Weaknesses." 3 dots appeared, then, "Boss, if you're thinking what I think you're thinking." Yong's jaw tightened. He looked at the window where Kayla's light had just flicked on, saw her small silhouette moving behind the curtains, saw Teresa appear behind her, probably tucking her into bed, probably telling her everything was fine, they were safe now. She didn't know the danger was already closing in. Didn't know that the miracle that had saved them came with a shadow attached. Didn't know that the man in the car outside had just made a decision that would either protect her family forever or destroy everything he'd built. He finished typing. This doesn't touch the organization. It's personal. Off the books. You sure about this? Yong stared at the message for a long time. Was he sure? Killing was business. Cold, calculated, necessary for survival. But this wouldn't be business. This would be something else entirely. This would be choosing to become the monster Kayla didn't know he was, so she could keep living in a world where monsters didn't exist. He thought about her hand in his, small and trusting. Thought about her saying you'd be a good daddy. Thought about the promise he'd made, that her mother wouldn't die, that they'd be okay, that someone strong had come when she asked. He typed one word, yes. Then he put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb, watching the apartment building shrink in his rearview mirror. Kayla's window stayed lit, a small square of warmth in the gathering dark. He'd saved them once with mercy. Now he'd save them with exactly what he was, a killer with a debt to pay and a child's smile to protect, no matter the cost. If this story stayed with you, let's stay connected. Hit subscribe for more.